minutes. And now we will be turning over to Toronto, and I would like to take John Ross to take the podium. Already giving the first question. Hello, John. This is Alex. You are medical director at Praxes Medical Group, and you will be giving us now a view into this second big part of what we call e-health, telemedicine. And I don't know if you can see that in Toronto, but I got this very nice board of the Canadian Embassy, and it shows us just again how big your country is and why you might like to rely sometimes on telemedicine. And I know your company has a long experience, including yourself. So whenever you're ready for your presentation, we're looking forward to it.
Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Testing. There we go. Okay, just want to make sure. So first of all, thank you very much. I'm really excited about being here. I really had no idea, quite honestly, what I was getting into. Despite my attempts to read the webpage, now that I'm here and getting a sense of what this is about, this is really a fascinating process. So thank you to Renee Bosenhart and Hannes Wieland for getting me here and inviting me here. I think this is going to be cool. Unfortunately, our colleagues in Germany cannot appreciate the view that we're all experiencing here on the 53rd floor overlooking Toronto on a blazing sunny day. It is spectacular. And so I'm going to be competing, I think, with the view to try and keep everybody focused on me. But anyway, you can do whatever you wish, of course. I'm afraid the people in Germany are stuck with me mostly.
We have a very focused audience here in Berlin.
Excellent, excellent. I was also encouraged by the comments by the ambassador at the beginning, actually on both sides, so certainly from our site though, who really nailed things well, talking about the use of telemedicine for remote settings. And that's what we've been doing for a long time. So I'm going to share, it's more almost like storytelling that I'm going to be trying to do here. And I look forward to any comments or questions that may be coming up. I am an emergency physician, so I work in an emergency department doing shift work. But I've also been doing telemedicine for the last 18, almost 19 years now. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as I go. So I guess I don't have a button to push. I'm just going to be asking for slide advancement. And I guess I don't really have it in front of me either, so I'm going to have to guess at what I'm, there we go, great. So that's actually just a picture of a ship in the background, and so if you could just advance, please. So I'm going to just to give you a quick story about Praxes and where it came from, a little bit more about the details of telemedicine, and I think everyone's probably have their own conceived ideas about what telemedicine means, and I'm going to try and touch upon some of that. I'm going to give you two quick examples using audio calls that we've taken, and then talk about some of the impact, and then a touch upon some of the economics, because that's usually what drives things. Next slide, please. So I was looking for our Praxes logo, and I went online, and this is what popped up. I was kind of shocked to find out that Praxes, according to the internet, has lots of other visuals that go along with it. So could I have the next slide, please, quickly? There's our logo. So it was on, I had to scroll down a little bit to find it, but interesting how many Praxes hits one can get. Yeah, next slide, please. So, and again, just you have to keep your finger on the clicker. Next, there we go. So we started, that's great, thank you. We started in 1997 based on a offshore oil and gas sector that was developing in Nova Scotia. And they required medevac services, first of all, to get injured workers off or sick workers off remote sites, but they also required medical oversight for medics that were working in that setting, as well as some of the support vessels. And so we started providing remote telemedical advice and support in the offshore. Well, it's a very safe industry, and so the number of calls that we got was very, very few. And we had pagers and cell phones, and we kind of, developed a system. So we said, well, who else is out there? And it turns out that there are other people that have interests in remote support. And so that evolved. We created a company of 5 doctors and 1 engineer, who happens to be my wife at the same time. And off we went. And we were kind of figuring it out as we went. We were lucky to be starting in telemedicine, I suppose, relatively early. Fast forward to 2015, we now provide medical advice and support to the East and West Coast, so the whole Canadian Navy. Even doctors occasionally will call us as a second opinion, but we provide support to the medics and to the physician's assistants on board. The Canadian Coast Guard has nurses on their vessels, research vessels in the far north. They'll call. We have fishing companies, oil and gas, both land and sea, so Western Canada, which is suffering a little bit from oil prices these days, but they also call us from land sites. We have several other offshore sites. Remote mining, construction companies, research teams during the summers when they're going into the north. Clinics. I'll talk about select patient projects a little bit towards the end. We've also then developed software to support our telemedical work, because we have to keep track of everything that we're doing. And we also do medical kits and staffing as a result of putting people on remote places. So we have 22 physicians that are now part of our team, as well as a number of employees. So it's a robust little business. I'm not going to retire quickly on this, but it's going well, and it's gradually growing. So it's quite fun to do. It's very different than going into a night shift on Christmas night, as an example. So it's fun to do this. And as a result of some success with a race that we did 2 years ago, we've now started a joint venture with a company called Clipper Venture, and we've created Clipper Telemed Plus, which is aimed at more remote work within the marine sector. Next slide, please. So what is telemedicine? Well, I think many of us think of a screen with a boom mic, with sort of constant video monitoring and full motion video, and that's telemedicine to many people. And most of our telemedicine has been done telephonically on a telephone. And so really, the telemedicine is joining a person in need with a provider. And it can be through a booked arrangement, so that at 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, we're going to do a telemedicine consult from remote Northern Ontario or somewhere else to a specialist in Toronto, for instance. That would be telemedicine. We do a full motion video potentially. But in many cases, the caller may not have that kind of bandwidth or that kind of equipment. And it becomes a little bit limiting in that callers then have to go to a site to hook up to a telemedicine unit and then make the connection. So what we've decided is that any caller anywhere, as long as they have some ability to connect through a satellite or through a cell phone, can connect with us. And the other part is that we don't do booked things. We do things because we're emergency service. So these are calls that come completely out of the blue, 24/7, 365. And so we get a caller connected with a physician generally within less than 2 minutes from the moment that they make the phone call to talking to a doctor, and that's part of our deal with the people that we work with. So it's really matching the caller's settings. So if they have the bandwidth and they have the equipment, then we're happy to do either pictures, still pictures, or video. But many of our callers do not have that kind of equipment or that kind of technology or bandwidth in terms of sending things. The other thing that's important to know is that not all doctors are comfortable doing this. Many doctors don't. They need to see a patient in person, and many funding systems actually prevent that too. So there's only a few of us that are kind of crazy enough to say, I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to listen to what you're telling me, and I'm going to see what I can do in terms of helping you through whatever the situation is. So that's a relatively small number of people that are comfortable doing that, and therefore we're able to leverage that small group and make us available to a larger, basically unlimited number of people that are out there. We also have operational standards and quality assurance piece, so you can't just sort of, there are a couple of companies where the doctor puts a cell phone in his pocket and says, I'm now doing telemedicine. What if he's in the shower? What if he forgets his phone? What if the phone dies? that's not good, reliable service. And so we've put a lot of time and care into both making sure that we have fail-safe backup systems in place, and that we also record and log everything we do, and we're transparent and have quality review processes in place. And Praxes has actually been ISO certified for a number of years. So it's fast, reliable access to experts who are accessible and accountable, and that's really the goal. Next slide, please. Maybe just flip through that again, thank you. So really, some of the basics at sites might be they have a blood pressure cuff, they have an oxygen saturation monitor, they can maybe check the temperature, they can maybe do a glucose. Those are going to be the basic pieces of information we're going to be able to gather. So relatively low-tech stuff that you can get at a clinic somewhere or the back of an ambulance. And then we add tools depending on the medic's skills. So if they can do ultrasound, then great. They can take a little portable ultrasound machine with them, and they can plug that in. But we're not really limited by that. And some of the techno boxes that people sell, which are often $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 for a box that you can open up, and it has a bunch of medical things inside it, hooked up to possibly a automatic sending system, are great. But one has to sort of wonder, so when you've collected all that stuff, now what are we going to do with it? And do they actually use these? And how is it being used? How is it changing the management that I can provide over the telephone? So sometimes collecting a lot of data only to say, well, gee, I've really defined that he's sick, but we're not going to keep him there anyway, so you need to get rid of him. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So non-medical personnel, there may be a benefit to taking a little bit more technology and helping them gather some more data. They don't know who's sick and who's not sick, and so being able to kind of get a bit of a visual through data can sometimes be helpful. Next slide, please. And again, it's really about the last little bullet there was just about the critical piece that if you're spending a lot of time hooking up things and trying to make them work and getting the technology to link up and all that sort of stuff. I mean, even this morning we've been kind of playing with the size of the screen and all sorts of things, so that there are lots of small technical things that can make a difference, but you get consumed by fiddling with that stuff, and you're not really taking care of the patient. Everyone can pick up a phone and call. And everyone knows how to do that, and so we can get that connection done very quickly, and then we can decide what kind of extra pieces do you need to add. So how does it work? Well, so a caller at the top left would be from a remote site. That's a you may not be able to see the visual very well, but it's a ship in heavy oceans. It's going up and down, maybe in the middle of nowhere. They'll make a phone call somehow through satellite or through cell phone or whatever they can do to our 24-hour center, who takes the phone call, gets the caller. Who are they? Will then decide which medical group, because we do have several medical groups across the country, Western group, Ontario, Quebec group, and an Eastern group, which client is calling and which group would be taking the phone call. All the calls are recorded, and the connection is made to the doctor, usually within 2 minutes. It goes to the doctor, who then will listen to the story and will make an assessment and be able to provide advice. This is different than HealthLink or one of those 811 nurse call line things where they follow a series of algorithms, and then in our experiences, they often say go to emergency. This is really where critical thinking needs to be put into place, and we're thinking about, okay, so where are you? I can't say go to emergency if you're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This is not an option. I can't send a medevac. All I can do is try and figure out how can we help you where you are right now, because otherwise you're in deep trouble. So the advice part is given, and then again we give advice. We'll say, okay, let's treat. We know that we know often what the medical kit contents are, so we can say, okay, go to the blue bag, open up the front pocket, and pull out this thing. You're going to give them 2 of those 3 times a day, and give me a call later on. We might say, boy, that guy sounds like he's really sick. You need to divert your vessel and go to the nearest port, or if they're within flying distance, then we'll send a helicopter out to go and get them. And then the last part is medical record keeping. So we have an online medical record that you can access from a smartphone or from a computer. We also can send pictures through that, and we can also do live video through a secure system, so that we're not going through Apple or Skype or any of those sort of things. It's direct and secure that way. Next slide, please. So why do we use it? Well, first of all, for the offshore, for instance, they say you need to have this. So it's a health and safety regulation that requires some sort of, we call it topside medical support. And so that's kind of a no-brainer. And many industries require this. There may be limited or no resources, and people realize, boy, we need some medical assistance for certain things that might happen. So we're going to put this in place ahead of time. Some people may have done something and gone off on a yachting voyage somewhere, and they had a medical emergency that was not very, didn't go well, or just made everyone very uncomfortable. And that's one of those aha moments. Next time, before we go, we should have something in place before we set out. And then the insurance companies are now growing more and more, saying, boy, there seems to be some advantage to having a telemedical support where we can start screening people before they go to access a healthcare center where they're going to be charged a lot of money for their travel insurance. Maybe we can get some advice prior to them going. And lo and behold, that's actually been a huge saving for companies. Go ahead, next slide, please. So who's calling? Well, there's a variety of people. So it may be a paramedic, nurse, it may be a doctor in some cases. So obviously they have medical expertise already, and they're going to try and they're calling about trying to refine their treatment, getting a second opinion, and so they're usually they're really nice callers to have, because I'm talking to someone who can really give me good quality advice or give me a good quality setting of the patient and describe them quite well. We also get a lot of calls, though, from non-medical people, a captain of a vessel, an experimental research group leader who may have first aid as their basic training. And so in that case, it's obviously a little bit more vague in terms of their findings. We have to ask a few more questions, but we can still walk them through things if we know what kind of training they've had, and if they have a medical kit that we're familiar with or that we've suggested to them. They can actually do a lot of things with that. And then we have non-medical people who have limited medical supplies. They have a first aid kit that they haven't opened for years. They don't even know what's inside it. And they have some guy with some problem they can't describe very well. And those ones are challenging, as you might imagine, because it's often a phone call from a small fishing boat off the coast of Nova Scotia. And all we can really say is, boy, that guy does sound sick. There's only one thing you can do, which is head into shore. And we'll see if we can arrange a medevac if that's required. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about the data around some of these callers. Next call, please. Next slide, please. So this is the Clipper Venture race is a 12 yacht, 70-foot yacht race that goes around the world over 11 months. They have one professional skipper, and they have 20 crew that change depending on which leg they're going on around the world. And many of these people have never been on a sailboat before their training began, or some of them do have some sailing experience. So it's a wide range of people that are on board these things. People like yourselves who decide, I've always wanted to go around the world on a sailboat and I'd like to race. I'm going to sign up for this, and that's who gets on these things. And so it's a really diverse group. So unfortunately, in the middle of the Pacific, coming from China over to San Francisco, one of the people fell off the boat. And you can imagine that's not a cool thing to do. Well, in fact, it is unfortunately a cool thing to do, but cool from the water point of view, temperature-wise. So next slide, please. We'll see if the audio works. It's a satellite call. Next slide, please.
11 degrees centigrade. We pulled him out, and he was hypothermic. We weren't able to record the temperature because we recorded the
Please. Next slide, please. So this is a case where the fellow fell out overboard. He was quickly lost out of sight, and they had to then do their man overboard drill. It was heavy seas. Luckily, it was during the daytime, otherwise he would have been gone. He was truly in the middle of the ocean, and they took them 90 minutes of trying to get around and missing and around and missing to get him out of the water. He was, at this point, cold. He was sort of semi-conscious, so he's like a big sack of potatoes, and he had to get him out of the water, over a big hull into the boat down below to get him warmed up, and that's when they made their phone call. And again, so that was only just a little segment of that phone call. But you can imagine getting the call in Canada, hi, we've got this guy, just fell off, he's cold, he's barely conscious, you know, what do we do? So we have to sort of go through that mental checklist of trying to provide some advice. He actually did very well and warmed up, and he had a soft tissue injury to his leg, which turned out to be nothing. So a happy ending.
Yeah, I agree with you, Captain. I agree with you.
Just the next button, please. So this was a case of a fisherman on a fishing vessel who was having chest pain down below in the factory floor, and they called to say, and this captain had actually had a heart attack in his past, and so said, I think this guy looks the same as what I felt like 4 years ago. And so we had to then talk them through some basic treatment. Giving aspirin, believe it or not, is the equivalent of giving the clot-busting drug. Giving them together is actually that much better, but giving him even just simple aspirin was a really important part of this guy's treatment. And anyways, we gave some other advice. He was going to give him something else that would have caused him some problems. So I think there was real advantage to us talking to him while we got the medevac going. And so from the moment of the call, we were able to talk to getting the search and rescue people involved. The search and rescue people called us several times to get some more advice. We provided the support to the search and rescue personnel after they hauled him off the boat, and he got into the cath lab and had his coronary vessel opened up within 6 hours of the initial chest pain, which was, again, one of those success stories, and he did very well. Notice I'm not telling you about the unsuccess stories, but we have very few of those, luckily. Next slide, please. So this is a busy-looking thing, but I want to just kind of talk you through just very briefly, because I think so this is a sampling of types of callers that we get. So the blue bars are the people from off the coast of Nova Scotia, no relationship with Praxes. They call through the Joint Rescue Coordination Center, which is the Coast Guard, to say, we have a medical emergency on board, can you put us in touch with somebody? And that's really all they're doing. And there are similar settings in Norway, in Denmark, in Holland, in Italy. So there's a number of places that will take phone calls. They tend to go into a mix of medical providers that may or may not be that familiar with this sort of setting. And so this is what we do all the time, is take remote calls. So we're reasonably happy with those. But so they'll usually call to one of those, the labels there on the second bar graph is called, it says percent med surge. So most of the calls they're making are going to be ones that are headache, chest pain, abdominal pain. It's not trauma. It's not sort of obvious trauma. It's something's gone on that's given them now some pain somewhere or some shortness of breath, and they're concerned about that, and so that's why they're calling. And because they have so few medical equipment and really no training, many of these calls cannot be treated on site. And so the blue bar on the third graph is really just sort of saying that many of those people we have to medevac off because they just can't stay on board. We can't really give them very much advice because they don't have much skill or much stuff. The second group is the orange group, and these are our fishing vessels and some others that actually have some equipment that we're familiar with on board their boat. We've suggested that they have extra stuff that can then allow them to treat more sophisticated things, and we can talk the captain through a fair amount. So they're also calling with, so they're calling more often, relative numbers, but the number of people that we have contracted with is actually relatively little compared to all the ships off the east coast of Nova Scotia. So smaller, kind of smaller denominator of people, but they're calling more often, which again is interesting. And they call more often because they can, and they know how to, which is also helpful. And so most of the calls they're calling about are also medical problems. These are tough fishermen. If they break something or they bruise something or they whack up against something, they know it's going to be sore, they suck it up. We'll compare that to another group in a second. So I can treat many of those people on board. When they call more often, they're calling with a swollen face from a dental infection, which we can treat on board. they're calling with some other things we can often treat on board, and therefore the number of medevacs or diversions is small. And then the last group are the Clipper venture people who tend to be calling even more often despite their relatively small numbers. These are people that are executives, and so their tolerance for medical bruises or whatever is relatively low. So they're calling more often. They're not calling, they're calling more with kinds of trauma things. So twisted shoulder, sore back, multiple sort of musculoskeletal things, because they're being thrown around inside this piece of plastic, 70-foot piece of plastic on the ocean. So they're going to get a lot of trauma, usually minor trauma. And so we can treat all those people basically on site. So that we only do like we did one medevac in the whole year with Clipper venture people. So I think it sort of gives you a sense of when you start having some more refined things, we can actually keep them on board. The next slide, please. Almost done. So the interpretation is, again, the JRCC, which is the Joint Rescue Coordination, the Coast Guard calls are coming from many sailors that are out there, but they don't call very often because they don't think of it, or they don't know about it, or they just don't think there's any point. But when something's bad's happening, they'll call because they want a medevac, and that's sort of basically why they're calling. Whereas Praxes clients will call for medical advice. They want some refinement on the kit they have, and they think that they can possibly treat the person on board, which is what we've done. And we've actually managed to decrease the number of diversions by the fishing company from 17 per year down to about 2 or 3, 4 per year, which is a huge saving. Each one of those diversions costs about $125,000. Next page, next slide, please.
Yeah, and John, I would like you to wrap up slowly so that we can start the podium.
This is my very last one, actually, I think, or close to the last one. So just some costs. This is kind of the economics piece of it. That the fishing client, the savings cost for them, so that they save about 3.5 to 4 times what they pay us to be available. As I said, each diversion costs about $120,000. So if we can prevent a few of those per year, we are well worth our weight. The yacht race, again, sort of a 4-to-1 ratio of what it costs. We saved them 305,000 pounds over the course of 11 months in preventing people going to local clinics wherever they were stopping around the world. So the insurance costs were down significantly as a result of that. We also provide advice to a medical, to an international high school in Ontario, where international students were going to the local clinics and emergency departments for relatively minor problems, and we've been able to call screen those people and prevent a huge amount of charge to the insurance companies. Initially, the savings cost was something like 8-to-1. We're now sort of bumped up our cost a little bit to make it more 5-to-1. And there are corporate benefits too, so that people are spending less time away from work and have a higher satisfaction. Next slide, please. So random callers, no training, variable connections. Really, we can't do a whole lot. We can try, and we provide a service, but it's a difficult group to deal with sometimes. Trained callers, I think we provide more refined advice and support, better quality of onboard care, fewer medevacs for sure, and a greater confidence. The crew feel and the captain feels more confident when they go out. Next slide, please. Maybe just go back if you can. If not, doesn't matter that much. Oh, it's okay. Oh, there we go. Zing, 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 zing. Anyway, I was just going to say that we're just leveraging limited resources, and I think there's a pretty good economic argument for doing this. I'll stop at that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John.